Well, thank you all so much. I am delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation to be able to sit in front of you wonderful people. I wish I had an opportunity to see each of your faces, but I promise that this session, although I can't see anyone on here, will be fully engaging. And so I will be asking for you to take part in providing some insight. Perhaps you can provide some expert best practices that you've known to work in your area of study and practice. Um, I'm excited because one, rarely is it, you get up and you have an opportunity to be with your people, and you all are my people. I get an opportunity to sit in front of DEI practitioners and experts and leaders across the nation, and it continues to tool me and refuel me. And so, thank you for the time that you are spending here. We have a small amount of time together, so we've gathered some great information that we're going to pack into this 1 hour. If you do have questions, I'm hopeful that someone through IDC can manage the chat box for us and stop me if we need to answer those questions in real time. If not, I will allow for some time at the very end. So let's jump right into it. Harmful culture trends, the impact of allyship, the impact of bystanders, and then coverers. So it's really a hodgepodge of some of the things that I've gathered in my 27 years of doing this type of work in DEI that I wanted to share today, just as a unique way for us to talk about an age-old problem, which is how do we create more inclusive cultures? Um, for those that are not here for the introduction, I just want to very quickly talk to you about our firm. We are DMK Consults. We started off as a very small firm focused in on DEI initiatives, creating inclusive cultures. And now we've expanded to be a national and now international presence in creating companies across the globe on how do we best include others? How do we ensure that our efforts are strategic and creating plans to do so. And so we specialize in really in three things. Aside from DEI initiatives, we also do mediation. So I am a mediator certified in a number of states to provide mediation services and conflict resolution. So it's a great way to marry two practices, which is how do we have hard conversations, brave talks, diversity dialogues, and create that as part of our curriculum for creating inclusive cultures. So we get an opportunity really I sit in front of a lot of people that are cussing and fussing. And I love it. It's a way to create peace, but then it's also a way to skill leaders on how to have hard conversations, particularly around race, discrimination, and all those things. And then the last thing we specialize here at DMK Consults is executive coaching. So I get an opportunity to work with on a monthly basis a number of chief diversity officers, chief executive officers, or those that are responsible for their company or firms' DEI initiatives. So I just wanted to just let you know that we've kind of gathered all three of my superpowers, and that has become the basis for our firm. And so we're excited about being present in 17 different industries, from firms and nonprofits to even professional sports teams. So what we talk about here today, my friends, remains important. So I want to do that as the preface for everything that I say today. So I'd love to know who is in the room. How many years have you devoted to this type of work that we're talking about? I'm going to use DEI as sort of a shortened acronym, but it also includes the A, the B, and the J: accessibility, belonging, and justice. And I'd love to know how many years have you devoted to any of those important parts of our DEI journey, and then what transitions have occurred during your time. And so Amber, I wanted to see if you could kind of help. If I don't see a chat room in front of me, so if you could help with that, I'd love to be able to hear the response.
Of course.
And I also want to thank you so much for putting this together and your leadership, and just, again, inviting me to be a part of this important conversation.
Thank you, Dionne.
Mm-hmm. And while you're gathering that information, I want to go ahead and just kind of talk about, since we are short on time today, and I want to make sure that we pack everything in that we have prepared for you. just kind of give you an understanding of what we will discuss in full length. One is, what are these harmful culture trends that we're seeing in this day and time? In order for us as practitioners in DEI work, we have to stay aware, right? We have to stay present, and we have to stay relevant. Understanding how things ebb and flow, we still have to, as change agents, be willing to be amenable and change with our culture. So I want to talk to you about the changes and then how they're presenting to not necessarily be a threat, but could be a potential harm to the work that we do. And then the next thing we'll talk about is how allyship, while it's supposed to be, a wonderful thing, and it really can be advantageous in your organizations to have formalized allyship programs, it can also prove to be a detriment to your organization. So we'll talk about the difference between basically good allyship and not as good. I don't want to say bad, but allyship that can certainly improve. Then we'll talk about the dynamics of bystanders. Bystander dynamics really talks about the social psychological theory that states that individuals are less likely to help. So it's this whole notion and culture that we've grown into where we stand by and let things happen. I don't know if you all look on YouTube or TikTok or Instagram and you see things happening where normally in past times we would stop it, we would interfere, we would intervene, we would call for help. But you see now people are putting their phones up before that they will use the phone to call for help. And so we'll talk about what that looks like in a very interesting way in our companies as it relates to DEI, that whole bystander dynamic. And then the last piece is one of my favorites, is talking about covering how, it's again, another psychological piece or dynamic that could potentially be damaging to the DEI work when we focus on why certain groups in our organizations feel a need to cover who they are. So I'm seeing a lot of things coming in the chat room. I see, got some good years on us. I see Mindy, thank you for being here. She's been doing this work for 8 years. I've seen a large business shifts around resources placed towards DEI focus. Sharon, thank you for being here. 3 years in formal DEI. So that is awesome, beginning the journey at a very good time. So thank you. Rachel, I love the way you spelled that. I've been in DEI work for 11 years. Lots of changes. Yes, you have seen the ebb and flow that I mentioned earlier around inclusion and belonging in areas of her work. And then Kimberly, 12 years as part of my work, more intense. Let me see, starting to come in pretty fast now, faster than what I can read, you all. Yes, intense focus in the last 5 years. You are exactly right. More than intense. And I do want to have some conversation about that. And then Toki, hello, founded a platform for ERG management 8 years now, and now leading DEI engagement and belonging. I love that. We do a special segment on ERGs, BRGs, connect groups, and just really kind of help shape and define. So maybe at some point you can sit in or invite us to come and add value to the work that you are doing. Thank you all so much for that. I will periodically check in with you just for your comments. So what we know for sure. Oprah wrote a book a few years ago that I love the title. It's like what we know for sure. I'd love to get also your insight on that. So as I'm talking about DEI, name one thing that you know for sure. I have 4 that I'm going to share with you that I know, again, in my 27 years of this practice, is that it has evolved and the culture that we live in has changed. And so again, it's almost imperative as DEI practitioners that we, first of all, recognize that and understand that many of our methods and the ways that we structure these DEI initiatives also have to change, right? Content doesn't, but the way in which we do things, our methodology certainly has to transform. The second thing that I know for sure is that DEI is the view and how people in our culture view it has shifted. The third is DEI work remains important. Don't get fooled about what you hear in the news. Don't get fooled about what you see in the papers and on social media, but that it still is imperative. It still is important. And a lot of companies are still reimagining and actually ramping up in their efforts. And then the last thing that I know for sure, my friends, is that our resilience Our resilience as DEI officers and practitioners it remains important, right? It is imperative that we continue this journey in building inclusive workplaces. All right. Thank you, Michelle, for logging in. You've been here for 8 years in this journey and has always been a part of how I lead and work. I love that. Thank you so much. So, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, and I always think about this on how DEI does this up and down, becomes trendy. And I've never said that DEI was trendy until we experienced what we experienced as a nation in 2020, when we experienced a horrible thing, witnessing the murder of George Floyd and witnessing how corporations that once in times past were keeping their finger on the snooze button suddenly released it and said, oh, there's some things that we have to address. We have to wake up. We have to be mindful. We have to be intentional. We have to be strategic about now, including those that historically have been marginalized in many positions in our organization. And so it becomes this fluctuation that we notice. I think as DEI practitioners, we should expect it. We should know that it will transform, it will move, and not be swayed and discouraged by the movement. It is how it happens. And for those of you all that I see on here that's been in this work for 11, 12 years or so, 8 years, you see that and you expect that, and you learn again how to navigate those areas. So let's just jump very quickly into some of the trends that we have pinpointed for our presentation today that have potentially impacted companies negatively as it pertains to DEI initiatives. So we've really seen a lot of disinvestment trend, right? Where companies are not investing in DEI because it's not trendy, right? No one's keeping a microscope over them anymore like they did last 4 years. And so it's no longer trendy. It's no longer in competition to the other firm down the street on what they're doing. So they've started to pull back on what they've allocated in their DEI budget lines. The second thing specifically speak to that. There's been low to no budget allocations if those are not met within 1 to 2 years. And this kind of like chaps my heart, because I think 1 to 2 years of strategic changes are very unrealistic expectation, right? And so for many of my colleagues, this is a very well-known, I would say, gripe, complaint that's legitimate, and that there's unrealistic expectation to make strategic change in an organization. And when companies don't see that, then they don't, up the budget, or they decrease your budget allocations for being able to change the culture. And so as well as I, is that it does take time for behavior modification, for policy change and implementation. Just to really, turn this big ship, there has to be adequate time as well as adequate funding. But we're seeing a lot of companies disinvesting in that because of the perceived expectations have not been met. The third thing is just companies are deprioritizing DEI because the goals remain abstract. And that's the thing that, I'm hearing a lot of CEO across the nation on the news that are saying, well, we feel justified in pulling back in our DEI efforts because the concept of full inclusion remains elusive, right? It's abstract. I don't understand it. And instead of getting full understanding, it just says, well, we're just going to pull back and deprioritize that. The other thing is just a change in leadership can also affect the DEI commitment. So changing of your chief diversity officer, your CEOs, or even those that are leading your committees can be a significant change and typically end up in disinvestment for the company as a whole. Then there's this lack of support, due to less external pressure. And it kind of goes with the first point that I pointed out. It's no longer trendy. It's not front page news anymore. It's not a pressure for many of my clients, for their external clients that are saying, hey, we want to partner with a company or partner with a firm that makes DEI it's one of its initial or important efforts. So less pressure means less attention to these efforts. And then things are calm now, so we don't need to invest in DEI. So there's this perceived notion that, okay, that now that we've done this ramp up of consciousness and awareness and structure and hiring, those that can lead inclusion efforts in the organization. It's calm now. So again, there's a disinvestment in that. Let me hit the chat box right quick. Toki, thank you so much. The biggest change that you've seen in DI moving into HR and budgets being cut back. Absolutely. And I think it's the age-old song for a lot of organizations. Like we're all singing the same songs, those that are working inside organizations are just seeing a scale back on that. And many times that can really project a message that they're scaling back on the importance of their DEI efforts as well. This is something that I didn't know any other way to describe it, but I'm sure you all are probably nodding your heads like, yep, I get it. In many of our DEI efforts in these companies, I see what I call the water effect. And for the lack of anything more scientific, this is what I came up with. Where you're seeing a lot of corporate efforts being watered down. You hear that in the news. We probably hear it every day. In some of our social media DEI reports that in order to be safe as an organization, they've sort of scaled back or watered down or even changed the wording of their initiatives so that it won't be so woke. That's a word I'm hearing. So they've watered down those efforts. The other thing that I'm seeing as part of the water effect of DEI is really this water under the bridge where it's no longer relevant or there's no point of worrying about change. Again, there's no external pressure from clients and there's no pressure from competition. There's no internal push either from leadership. So it's water under the bridge, and they seemingly have discounted how important and imperative these DEI efforts are. And then the last piece of this water effect is not being watered, not being attended to, there's no genuine efforts being made towards any of the DEI initiatives, at least beyond the surface, checkbox type of initiatives. And so I'm seeing a lot of the water effect, and many of my clients and chief diversity officers that I'm working with, it becomes a constant strain on them. How do we continue to create these spaces where people will feel motivated and it won't just become this water effect? I love you all's comments. I'm going to keep going and then I'm going to come back to it. But Shelly, let me go ahead. The change I have seen in companies who copyright the DEI efforts of their employees as their own is pretty disturbing. So if the employee makes a presentation or staff is not now owned like the intellectual property, yeah, absolutely. I've never actually done anything personally with intellectual property and who owns it, but I do think that that can be very disturbing. And so I thank you for sharing that. The other thing, my friends, is as we're really recognizing some potentially harmful trends is that goals are set, but there's no full strategic, sturdy implementation, right? There becomes a gap. I'm sorry. My microphone just jumped out of my ear. Can you give me a thumbs up or let me know if the sound is still the same? Just so that, all right, thank you, Kimberly. So there becomes a seemingly gap between setting DEI goals and actual implementation. That's a hard push, I do know that. But I think many of times we are hiring the wrong people. We're putting minorities in place, and because you're Black, because you're a woman, because you're LGBTQ, then you are qualified to lead and structure change management in an organization. And I don't think that should be the case. And then many times you'll have organizations are not really sure where to begin. So there's a start and stop, and it becomes discouraging and demotivating for a lot of people in that organization. And then really goals are not clearly defined. And that can be a big thing there where not only are goals not defined, but what is DEI in this organization? And it looks different for each company. And so really taking the time to make sure that your implementation is strong, your presentation is strong, people fully understand how they can play a part in championing those change elements. Again, you all, if you have any questions, feel free to ask those questions in the chat. Here's the other thing, and I know I'm not saying anything brand new, but we're seeing how now DEI is part of lawmaking efforts, right? Part of the conversation where, laws are being introduced and are actually influencing change in companies, right? Where you see some companies are influenced to change or even cancel their DEI efforts due to consumer pressure, right? Their customers, the industry pressure, right? State laws and media. I don't know about you all, and perhaps, again, I've been doing this work for a little while before there was even a title of DEI. We just did good work in the community. But as a practitioner, seeing what we do become part of a conversation of law in the United States, where companies no longer even want to say the word, is troubling, because there's a belief by some lawmakers that these DEI programs and trainings are really indoctrinated with like political ideology that's divisive, that's not patriotic, that's, you know, has the purpose of creating more harm than good, or that it's essentially separating people. And which is really, is, you think about the words, you think about the work that we do and committed all of my adult career to, it becomes very offensive because it is the opposite. We want to see people who historically were marginalized, historically did not have the same opportunities and access, to now have that. It shouldn't really be part of the conversation here in 2024, but it is. And so, not only has gone from conversation to now laws. And then what we're seeing statistically is that the marginalized employees, those that historically have been underrepresented, remain in the same place, right? There's no movement, there's no opportunity, there's no access, the way we would expect it to be in this day and time. So we just put here just a little map here that I think is always interesting, and it sparks a lot of discussion. If we had time to do a breakout, we certainly could do that. But I want to just kind of show you there are 30 states here. NBC News gave this and pushed this out, and it was very interesting. They talked about how 30 states have introduced or passed more than 100 bills, you all. 100. So they are busy to either restrict or regulate diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in the current legislation session, right? And again, this was a report that was put out with NBC News. So you'll see here that blue color is where it was actually bills were introduced. So try to identify your state. I would love to know where you're from. You want to type in your city or state in the chat box? That would be great. And then you see here that the yellow was passed at least one chamber or one piece of legislation where DEI initiatives again are wanting to be restricted or eliminated. And then you'll see that in the orange it's fully enacted. And so concerning my very first time seeing these type of efforts, concerted efforts being put forth in laws, but this is the day and time that we are in. Ooh, I see all the people going in the chat box. Wisconsin, North Carolina in the house, Kentucky. Mindy, you said, unfortunately, sitting in Iowa, lots of harmful policies being introduced. Yeah, I'm in Missouri, so I'm with you. Ohio, Washington State, Maryland. Oh, you all are all over the place. Georgia. Hey, Georgia, Illinois. Thank you again for you all for being here. So let's keep it moving. So we think about harmful trends, right? We think about some of the things we talked about, laws. We talked about being watered down efforts. We talked about disinvestment. Now I want to talk to you as the practitioner. How one, we experience a lot of things, and that many other, professional people in our organization may not. And so I want to just kind of, for a few minutes, recognize the things that we as practitioners, we as DEI agents and champions of change go through and have to manage, right? It's an extra layer of management that we have to do well in order to do our jobs efficiently. So what is diversity fatigue? This is a term that came out a few years ago. I bought a book about it. It's amazing just to kind of see how they've been able to pinpoint patterns of what diversity practitioners experience. It's a feeling of exhaustion or frustration, as with any other kind of fatigue and responsibility that you have with your families and the community and all the work that you do. This specifically is tied to the DEI work. It can rise from ongoing efforts to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. And let me tell you all, my friends, it is real. It is real, and it's contributing to attrition in a lot of organizations where you're seeing good talent, good, great talent, great DEI practitioners that are leaving just because of the constant strain of fatigue and not being able to manage that. Fatigue also comes not just in a part of what we do as practitioners, but also in the organization, where the organization begins to feel the fatigue and the stress and the lack of understanding and the lack of implementation. And so that becomes then this full on, we're tired of trying, and so we're just not. That can play out to be very harmful. And so I wanted, that's something that, a lot of colleagues, and perhaps you can provide some insight on how you manage that. One of the things that I do is I have to take and make sure that there's a day in the week where I can refuel, I can power down without guilt, right? Where we actually have a meditation leader, a corporate meditation leader that comes in for our staff. We have meditation Mondays, and it just allows us to refocus, to get re-energized, to really think about the people that want to be great in everything that they're doing and how we can help partner in those areas. And so really thinking about how you manage that fatigue, I think it lends for a great conversation. So here are some of the things that are presenting itself that I wanted you to be mindful of the trends. And if there's some things on this list that you think need to be added, you don't offend me, go ahead and put in the chat box. And we can certainly add that to the conversation as well. But overwhelming and unrealistic expectations. I hear that time and time and time again of how organizations and companies and leadership are putting these unrealistic expectations on their DEI officers, and eventually they spin out. Also, the lack of support, lack of staffing or understaffing and resources, budgets like we talked about earlier. And then many times negative feedback. For some, negative feedback can be detrimental. For others, it can fuel you. It makes you want to regroup, and come out even stronger. So you have to also be mindful that feedback can be a conduit of change, or it also can hinder the whole entire process. Or the lack of progress, the perceived lack of progress. If people don't see initiatives and change or even programs quickly, then they perceive that program or your DEI efforts are progressing. Short-term focus instead of long-term commitment. Oof, that's a good one. That's a good one. We're doing it now, but we have no goals, no long-term commitments for the future. And after a while, people, and it's human nature, will spin out. So we have to be mindful. Those are the things too that also contribute to diversity fatigue. Oh, here's a big one. I'm gonna skip the next one, but folks resisting change. That in and of itself could be another workshop. Like, why is change so hard? Why do we have to have these structured, strategic efforts? Why does it have to be continually put in line of sight for people? It's because, people fear. People fear change, or people don't want to be told that they're doing something wrong. There's this perception that if I have to change, then I must have not been doing something right the first time, right? And so there's all these number of dynamics that create this resistance that we're seeing as well, that diversity fatigue. I don't think these pods want to stay in my ears today. As much as we pay for these things, they better stay in these ears. Looks like we got some comments in the chat box. Shelley submits that psychological safety issues for potential participants in any organization. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a big topic now. And, I'm hoping that you all, particularly those of you all that are working in-house, that mental health is part of your DEI initiative, because psychological safety, trauma-informed care and inclusion has been a topic that's been on a priority for our firm, because it's a new topic and it's one that we're working to normalize and destigmatize and have conversations about what it means to be psychologically safe in your organization, how we can maintain that safety for ourselves. So thank you for bringing that up, Shelley. But when you don't have it, it certainly can contribute to this diversity fatigue we're talking about. So I don't want to be Debbie Downer, right? And certainly I don't want to, excuse me, give you all bad statistics and all that. But you all are tough. We're diversity practitioners. We have to be tough. We're built that way. And so there's some resilience, but I wanted to just give you and spin it a little bit. While we've talked about what is dinging at our efforts, we also have to know that here's what's working, right? Here's what's increasing. And what we've learned is, as a trend, a lot of organizations are rebranding their efforts. They're redefining the name, right? And expanding the purpose, but they're doing this without watering down the efforts. And I think that's music to my soul, is that we still have the focus in the right direction, but we're also understanding that how DEI, just the letters DEI, has been weaponized in our culture and politics and in the news today. So being very creative, I don't think hits against our authentic efforts to, again, create inclusion in the workplace. The other thing that I want to encourage you as we're forging ahead in this work is really start to prioritize equity in hiring and advancement opportunities. Like, how are we growing our people? It's one thing to hire great talent. And I hear a lot of my clients say that a lot. We hire great people, but we're losing them. It's like a revolving door. And the thing is that once they're there, we need to learn how to utilize, right? Really focus in on the inclusion and equity piece, right? How are we utilizing those strengths that they bring to the proverbial table? The second thing is really implementing practice that level the playing field and be mindful of what that means. Where are your disparities in your organization, right? Where are the barriers? Where are the coverers? We'll talk about that a little bit later. The systemic barriers that impede career progression. And then creatively develop, this is my favorite part, creatively develop different metrics for success and accountability. What does that mean? Really count what counts. That is my quote. Count what counts. And so being able to recognize in your respective roles and in your specific organizations, identifying what meaningfully can be counted and reported as growth and progress. Also, how can you tie your DEI efforts to your bottom line, right? Now, where it's the quantifiable goals that can really project and message incremental success. Because not all the time do you have the people to be able to show we have a large number of diverse talent. So when you don't, my suggestion is that you really think about creative DEI metrics. And so we've just put a few examples here that can help in your efforts. Leadership, what are your pipeline efforts? Who are you promoting? What is the representation and advancement rate, right? And this, again, may not be new information for many of you all, but for some that I saw here, this is like, oh, okay, an aha moment. We can provide other DEI metrics that show success, right? That impact a greater impact. Pay equity, ensuring that there's gender equity regarding pay, advancement for your employees, who's getting promoted, who's getting developed, who's getting that sponsorship, right? Mentorship, and who's being trained and developed for leadership roles. And then even thinking about accessibility. Are you providing accessibility accommodations? Are you up on your policies, your practices, benefits, and those type of things? The other example is, retention. Are you able to hold your people, right? And then if not, what are those things that you can identify as those blind spots that are infecting engagement? That's affecting inclusion, and that's affecting recovering. The other thing is, if you're into engagement surveys and the NPS, which is really the employee net promoter scoring, and it just really is measuring how, and if employees will recommend your company as a good place to work. For a number of organizations, being recognized as a great place to work is key. And so really, understanding that there are a number of different DEI metrics that we can utilize to show impact and to show growth. Because what I'm seeing as a harmful trend is that organizations are using the same type of metrics and it's not working and they're not hitting their goals. And then it, it becomes this snowball of, well, then it's not progressing. So then we will scale back on the budget and then we'll understaff it. And then again, becomes something that is not supported by your organization. So I'm going to stop for a minute, just because it's a good time to stop, and just to get some of your thoughts. So I'd love for you. I don't feel like I've had to beg you to engage, and so I appreciate all of the input. But I'm going to pause for a minute, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are regarding any of this material that we've just explored. It also gives me a chance to drink some coffee, you all. I'm on cup number 2, so I'm like revved up and ready. All right. Yes, Josiah, that's a very good point that rebranding has been essential to also get executive buy-in. Yeah. And so we're seeing, less about DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion, and more about employee engagement. What are some other things that you all know? Josiah, are there some specific terms that you've seen used that have kind of expanded the DEI efforts? Yes, Talkie, inclusion and belonging. Tell me more about what you mean about that. Are you saying that there's more of an effort just in those two concepts? Are they taking away the E? We just got a national announcement about SHRM that has taken the E out of DEI efforts, and so how that's caused a big issue. But yes, Toki, programs being rebranded without the E. Yep, we are right on the same page. And so we're seeing that. I've sat in a room where, many practitioners have argued that this is wrong, we should keep it and stay authentic. And, my thought is, there's a lot of words to describe the work that we do. And so long that as your efforts and your structure and the way that we know brings about success and inclusion, I'm all for it. Miranda, struggling with an organization, giving access to employees satisfaction results and giving access to employees at all. We also have been seeing programs rebranded as well. Yeah, so a number of things that we have to work from, but I'm struggling with my organization giving access to employee satisfaction results. So they're actually having and trusting that people will give genuine feedback, but then providing that to the employees. I don't see that as a problem, but unless they are providing it in a way where there's no identifiers, there's no names, or it's kept anonymous. Because I think, when you have surveys, people need to understand what the feedback has been and the general consensus of the survey. The other piece that as organizations that I think is a blind spot is when you push out an employee survey and you ask for feedback, you have to be ready to create some change in those spaces where they've identified those problem areas. And if I've missed your comment and what you're trying to communicate, Miranda, you are certainly welcome to hit me again with a comment, just explaining that a little further. Kimberly, as a nonprofit, I hear a lot of fear about funding and pushback from donors. Oh my goodness. So we've just had an uptick in our nonprofit clients, and really to your point, we're seeing a lot of pushback, from the topic of religious organizations who typically and historically have been the major funders and major grantors not wanting to fund anymore because these nonprofit organizations are expanding their efforts to be more faith-based and inclusive of other faiths aside from Christian faith, right? Aside from the traditional Christian principles. And so they're including other people, they're including other faiths and religion. And so that has become a no-no for many of their main donors. And so it becomes this notion of we want to be inclusive, we want to be relevant in this culture, but we also want to make sure we get that cash, right? We want to secure the bands. And so what does that look like? And how do we come to an understanding that the rebrand, and in some spaces, they've had to say, well, we don't want your money. If you're not including, work and efforts and assistance to LGBT people in the community, then we don't want your money. And so it's become those type of conversations too that we are experiencing and helping our clients navigate. Shelley was said, survey wording to get positive feedback rather than authentic responses, which may be negative. Oh, those survey wording can be tricky. So yeah, you have to be very mindful of that as well. Melody shares that she's worked with senior leaders of an organization that pushed back on having focus groups where their employees could expand on the employee engagement survey. Interesting. So your ERGs, are they BRGs, or I'd love to know more about that. And Shelley is doing an amen. She agrees with Melody on that point. So thank you all so much for weighing in on that. Let's keep it coming. I'm going to move on to our next piece here. Oh, again, with the positive reflection is that our real numbers are that 83% of companies, and they did a poll in the USA Today fairly recently, actually in July, it talks about the vast majority, 96% of corporate social impact professionals, us, those that are creating, impact in 125 major companies say that DEI commitments have either stayed the same. So 83% said that DEI efforts have stayed the same, while 13 have actually ramped up and they have increased their efforts. According to a new survey that the Association of Corporate Citizenship Professionals and Your Cause from Black Bowed shared exclusively with USA Today. And then we just found some other statistics that I think is very encouraging for the work that we do, because you hear the negative part. You see and hear government-controlled universities and even some nonprofits that are having to really squash their DEI efforts. But then there are a lot of other companies that are actually ramping up. And it's a quiet ramp up, and it's concerted and strategic. And so they're still saying that they're doing that, or they're stayed the same. 94% benefits of DEI on recruiting, hiring, and retention. And so there's been a focus on those three main areas. But we do see that 17% reported in these polls that executives talk less about it to those on the outside, right? Doing the work, being mindful, but we don't have to broadcast it. I don't necessarily know how I feel about that, but I'm just happy that it is not being cut, and that organizations are still focusing on this very important work. And then a third of the executives describe DEI differently now. So again, reshaping, restructuring, and talking differently about DEI, I think, is also one of the trends that we're seeing. And that can be good or bad for our efforts, but I think you definitely need to know our numbers. So allyship, very quickly, and I see that we have about a good 17 more minutes. So I'm going to give you this information, and then we can hopefully have more time to just connect and answer any of your questions at the end. So allyship is something that I see a lot. It's used in a very broad term about, how important it is to have allyship, have people in your organizations that serve to help. But what we're seeing is that allyship can also be a deterrent, because I don't think we fully understand and haven't really taken the time to adequately define the most effective allyship in our company. So I just wanted to kind of give you an understanding of the different types of allyships, and then how they can be good or how they can serve to be a detriment to the efforts. So active allyship by far is the zenith of what we want. Someone that is actively supporting specifically marginalized groups through concrete efforts and actions. And then a sponsor. As we know, the difference between a mentor and a sponsor is a sponsor has that relationship capital in your companies. They're able to use their influence to advocate for you. and they are able to support your career advancement, particularly those that, again, don't historically have that. The marginalized, people of color, women, LGBTQ, differently abled, in organizations that may be othered or overlooked. Then we have the intersectional allyship, where they recognize, acknowledge the differences, they support multiple identities of marginalized individuals. So it's not like, as a Black LGBTQ person, we're just only going to support, the Black efforts that you need. Forget about the LGBTQ. And so I'm saying that we have to be mindful that we are educating our allies and those allyship programs to support those many a multitude of multiple identities that define marginalized identities that we have to be tapped into. And when you are educated on that, you begin now to be able to pinpoint needs and create spaces where these groups of people feel supported in their career progression. Then we have actively the upstanders, they address discrimination, and then the scholars. I love this part because I want, as we're creating these allyship programs, right, to be, to not be harmful, we also have to encourage allies to be self-educated. Don't wait till there's a Dionne King to show up, and that's the only time where you think about DEI and how you can expand your support, but be a continual learning and educating yourself about issues. We have so much access. This is my iPhone at our fingertips. So we have zero excuse on being able to have these topics and how to support different groups at our fingertips. Thank you, Shelley. She says she loves this allyship differences breakdown. I get that response. Maybe I should do a separate workshop on that. I've done this before with a client, and it really was impactful to their group. So let's switch a little bit. What has not fared well? What I call, I'm not going to say it's bad allyship, but it's still loading in its effectiveness. Passive allyship, right? They're aware of the cause, they're aware and they're supportive in belief, but they're very passive in action. In my mind, and I'm very visual, I see a person kind of standing on the sideline. I'll help you, but you got to tell me what you need help in. I'll help you, but I'm not going to be very active in figuring out or using my relationship capital in the organization. I'm not going to be active in thinking what can develop you better, right? Or pulling you in spaces that I have exclusive access to that you may not have. And so I visualize and see that as passive allyship, and it continues to be an issue in our companies. Performative allyship, just what that name is, all about the performance, appearing to support, right? And then the white savior mentality. And we have to be careful with that because many times our white colleagues or those that sit in decision-making committees, or perhaps are sitting in roles where many are not. And so we have to understand being able to effectively use your relationship capital, use your influence to be able to develop without it being more of an emotional experience that makes you feel good and validates your privilege under the guise of allyship. I'm gonna pause for a minute to let that sink in, because I think that's very powerful. And I think sometimes that's where we don't understand that allyship can also be a detriment and be very harmful. According to many of my clients that have talked about it, tried to implement it, and it just proven to not be very successful. So which allyship do you believe, and you can just type one word in the chat, that can prove harmful to cultural norms in the workplace, and how? So I'd love you just kind of think about the allyships that I just talked about that can prove to be harmful, or perhaps you've seen it or experienced it. And many times it's good intention and good efforts, but it's just not rolled out in a way where it's most effective. All right, I see you all chiming into the chat. Yeah, Michelle, she said all of them can prove to be harmful. Miranda, performative, then shoot all of them. Okay, good. Thank you all so much. I love this group. So very quickly, bystander dynamics is something that is new, something that we've started here as a firm, really studying what that looks like. And in many times, it's sort of like the opposite of the performative allyship, where this notion that we're seeing trend more and more, how we're standing back and watching things happen, um, and not really seeing ourselves as community citizens to help, right? And we're seeing that in DEI efforts as well. And it's proven to be potentially harmful, where we see that, and let me just define it first, and then we'll kind of talk about some of the attributes. Bystander dynamics are factors that impede our decisions to intervene across a wide variety of situations in the organization. And sort of diffuses responsibility. Oh, this ain't my problem, or I'm not part of that group, or I don't have anything to say in the ERG. So, I'm gonna let those people handle it. And so it becomes this reinforced bystander dynamic where it goes unchecked. People become very complacent. It creates a toxic environment in some spaces, and then it impedes the progress, safety, and health of your DEI efforts, especially when you see someone like there's some microaggressions or some micro inequities that are being pushed towards an individual or a group of people in your organization. And then there's this bystander, like, thank God. So I'm not going to be active in speaking on this group's behalf. Thank you, Shelley. Loving the bystander dynamics. These are just some very interesting and creative ways to talk about an age-old, topic, right? And that's one of the things that we specialize in, is making sure the conversation stays fresh, fresh and so clean, so that people can digest it, people can understand it, and make it relevant in their lives and in their respective practices. So just a few things for some tools as you're mitigating, as you're trying to stop people from being bystanders, and really press upon them that it is important for you to be a champion of change. Is one, recognize it, right? We can't just keep not looking and not seeing, and then examine it, acknowledge it, confront it, and then really have some strategic ways to transform it. If you'd like to talk more about that, you certainly can contact us at dmkconsults.com, and DMK Consults on every platform, social media platform. And then this last thing, you all, I have 9 more minutes. This is my absolute favorite, so make sure we have time for this. Coverers, what does that mean, Dionne? I want to just talk to you a few minutes about how covering in the organization can be very harmful. And we're seeing a trend of that, but a lot of organizations have no clue what it is. Like, they feel it, but have no words to define it. So I want to kind of give you a little bit of top level information about what it means and how it's impacting the workplace and DEI. So what is covering? Well, covering in its simplest form means muting your authentic self, right? It's the act of toning down something or muting a disfavored identity in order to fit into an organization, in order to appear professional in your respective company. That's what covering is. I always think of like the actual cover that you put on yourself to look better, right? And to be accepted. So some smart people, one that I absolutely love his work, his name is Kenji Yoshino, and Deloitte put together an actual study where they went into organizations and they looked at companies and actually surveyed about 3,129 respondents in organizations across the United States that included ages, a mix of ages and genders and races. And the respondents came back with information based on 4 axes. Like, I cover in at least 1 or 2 of these different ways. And so Kenji Yoshino and Deloitte were able to define the different ways in which people cover in their respective organization. And I want to go very quickly on what this is. And as I'm talking about this, my friends, think about if there's ever been a time where you felt that you've covered or you've seen that in action in any of your organization. Well, the first one that they define covering is appearance-based, right? Where you really are modifying aspects of how you present, how you show up in order to fit in, okay? I'll give you an example. Many generations, many times, I've been taught as a Black woman that it was necessary for us to wear our hair a certain way, opposite of how it's growing, right? To straighten it in order to be perceived as professional. Imagine being told that how your hair grows out of your body, it's not professional and it's not acceptable. And so, but that's what happens still. So we have the Crown Act and we have different laws that are passed to say, hey, I can actually wear my hair and be professional. And so we see a lot of demographics and certain groups in an organization that may not feel welcomed because they don't feel as though they appear or they're perceived to not be professional because of how they show up or how they appear. The second one is affiliation-based covering, where they minimize their behavior widely associated with one's identity. Now, what does that mean, Dionne? Let me give you an example. Affiliation-based covering concerns how individuals avoid behaviors that are widely associated with that identity. Often, like it's this effort to negate stereotypes. So you not want to hang out with your own kind in an organization so that you won't perpetuate perceived negative stereotypes. So here's an example that they give in the study. A woman might avoid talking about being a mother because she doesn't want her colleagues to think she is less committed, right? Or that she may be distracted with her home life or mother obligations, or that she may be overwhelmed. Thus, many organizations will make the decision for the mother, oh, she's not committed, so let's pull back on some things. So in order to not be put in that position, you'll see a lot of career women will not talk about their responsibilities as mothers so as not to look like they're not committed. Advocacy-based covering is not defending or promoting your group's interests. An example that they give is your covering concerns are really stemmed on sticking up. You don't want to stick up for your group, right? And the example they give is a veteran might refrain from challenging a joke, something that potentially is harmful or offensive. Perhaps they're telling a joke about the military because they don't want to seem too overly strident, right? I don't want to stick up for my group too much because then they're like, oh, she's extreme, she's with them. It becomes this perpetuating stereotype that can really other some groups of people in your organization. And then the last one, my friends, are the association-based covering. And people will say, and that's avoiding contact with other group members. It kind of sounds similar to affiliation, but there's a difference here with association. It's based on and concerned about avoiding contact with other group members. So affiliation was more about avoiding behaviors that are stereotypically affiliated with that group. And an association is avoiding contact with group members, right? You don't want to huddle too much. Or you don't want to be associated with certain things that the company may not deem appropriate or professional. For example, a gay person or a gay employee might refrain from bringing his same-sex partner to work functions so as not to be seen as too gay, right? And so these are a lot of different stigmas that and unfortunately, concepts of othering that we see employees dealing with. If you have pockets and groups of people in your organization that continue to feel covered, that might be your first space where you think about how do we create spaces where people don't feel othered, and how do we become more strategic in building those structures where they feel included. Okay, here are some of the numbers very quickly when they did this study. I would encourage you so you can even Google this study is free. It's called, you see, did they put the slide in here? I think I have the resource for you that I'll give that to you. I think my assistant put that in there. But just very quickly, we saw that LGBTQ individuals and employees across all of these companies that they hold are the most are the coverers. That's the group that feels that they need to cover the most, because there's not a lot of protection. There's not a lot of state laws. They're not always considered a protected class in many organizations. And so there still is a need to cover who they are, to mute their authentic selves. And then second in this lineup for this polling are Blacks or African American. Then we go down the list, as you can see here, women of color, and then women, Hispanics or Latinx, and then straight white men. And then that's an interesting topic. We don't have time to go into that, but even men, straight white men who typically are excluded from this DEI dynamic discussion, there are ways in which they cover in an organization as well. And it tells that there's two ways that you probably can't guess. One is age. At certain ages, they begin to do things that will change so that they can look younger. You talk about the midlife crisis, you talk about the men's hair dye, you talk about all these different changes that they will exhibit in order to cover. And then the other thing is mental health, right? Not letting people know that you may need help in some areas, counseling, those type of things. So it's a fascinating way to really talk about interesting ways to pinpoint your blind spots in your organization, particularly when you have groups of people that cover. All right. So it looks like, and I want to be definitely mindful of your time, we are coming up to the end of what we're talking about. Here are your resources that I talked about earlier, right? So I encourage you to go online and look up these and just kind of get some ideas on how to pinpoint those groups, because they are proven to be harmful. When we continue to have these coverers in our organization, we don't want to do that. So our review today, we went through cultural trends and we understood the changing dynamics. We went through allyship, where we're cultivating active, supportive, and educated allyship in our companies. We talked about bystander dynamics, that I appreciate your feedback, and where we as champions can teach our companies how to omit the notion to observe without action. And then coverers, we concluded with that, and then really pushing this notion that we have to teach and tool our companies on how to recognize and respond to groups that feel as though that they cannot bring their authentic self to the workplace. So I'd love to, if we have a little time, to write in the comments what stuck, what an hour ago you did not know about. Amber, am I still okay? Is it 15 minutes that I have, or am I out of time? But I do want to be respectful of our friends.
Yes, you can now open up for Q&A. My internet went out, so I just popped back in.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you for popping back in. I didn't even notice that. How many more minutes do we have? I'm sorry, I should have looked at the agenda that you have here.
So you have Q&A for 15 minutes. So you
15
can open
minutes.
up for Q&A.
Awesome. Well, let me just give you some tools, because there's, one thing you